Okay, so the history of yoga is very long. A lot of the practices that we do in yoga are still very ancient. They're still the old ancient practices. But there's also a lot of practices that we do that are very different from the ancient yoga practices, possibly because we are approaching yoga also in a very different way. And it's the same for anything, anywhere in history. Um, People are changing, times change. So our purpose for yoga is different from the purpose of yoga for the ancient yogi. And that's just life and that's just evolution. It doesn't mean we're lesser human beings or we are greater human beings. We have all different needs. So what is the goal in yoga? Let's look at it from the perspective of like all of these different ages. When we look maybe as far back as 6 BCE, CE is Common Era, so we changed it from Jesus Christ, from before Christ to before Common Era. Basically, BC is the same as BCE. The purpose of yoga was liberation from suffering. So life is seen not as a beautiful thing. Let's live this life. Let's have long lives. The yogi sees life as suffering. And this is echoed also by the Buddhists. The Buddhist thought that you are born, then you grow old, and then you get sick, and then you die. That's the cycle of life, just goes round and round. In the monastery, they teach you with something called a tanka, which is a painting. Let me see if I can show you. If you just go Wheel of Life, tanka, you will see something like this. The Lord of Death, Yamantaka, is around. He's there. He's like consuming. And then you have all of the stages of life: birth, sickness, old age, and death. So this just goes on, and then you're reincarnated. In yogic philosophy, reincarnation is not something you debate. It's like a law. In the West, we can debate it, maybe, maybe not, but in yogic philosophy, that's the way it is. So you get reborn again. There's even a meditation that they teach you in monastery if you become a Buddhist monk or nun, where they teach you to visualize a pile of dead bodies. Dead bodies, one on top of the other, like the laundry. Receive? No. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like if you haven't done your laundry for 2 weeks, it's a big pile. So you imagine that instead of clothes, you have bodies. And the idea is you try to think that, life, this life cycle is very tiring. I have so many bodies. I've been everything in all of my past life. It's time to move on. It's time to end this suffering life. So that's liberation from suffering is their goal. Samsara is the word in Sanskrit that is used to describe the suffering life. So suffering life equals samsara. By the age of Tantra, which is around 6 to the 10th BCE, the goal of yoga changed a little bit. So there's this addition of, I not only want to change this life, I want to become like the gods. Why not? I can become divine. I am divine. So self-deification. So I see everything as already pure heaven, and I am also a pure being. Okay. Now, tantric practices can become very controversial to the person who is not really pure, their heart is not into it. They can abuse it, you know. um, you think everything is pure. I am the goddess, therefore I can do whatever I want. You know, you see what I mean? That's problematic. You can, it can be misconstrued. It can be, uh, you can make yourself, you can put yourself into a position of power and you can abuse it. Yeah, I am the goddess of yoga, and therefore you should all follow me, and I can do whatever I want. So I will do this, do that, etc. So inevitably, also you have to think that the tantric yogi, the yogi of the past, they're not people who lived in society, right? You have to put yourself in that context. They're not the regular people, fishermen, merchants, business people, householders. The yogis lived outside of society. They lived in the caves, they lived away, apart from society. The tantric yogis in particular had like real special places where they lived. You know, they lived in burial grounds. They lived in, you know, just to practice seeing everything as divine. They will live in a heap of trash, you know, like this. So really left field. They're challenging society. They're challenging the way of living. They're like activists in a way, you know. They're challenging the way society thinks. Um, there's one story I really like. If you're interested in the tantric yogis, you read about the Mahasiddhas, the Mahasiddha. Maha means great, Siddhi means power. Mahasiddha, they had great power. Can't remember whether it was 64 or 81 Mahasiddhas. There's this one story, and this Mahasiddha was I think like in the river, and he was a monk and he was eating raw fish. He was catching the fish from the river and just eating it raw without cooking it, etc. And then some people from the village were passing by and seeing this, and they were very surprised, and they were saying, "Oh, Degulas, what are you doing? You're supposed to be a monk, you know, show no harm. Why are you eating like this?" And then he catches them. He's like, "Aha, you know, you are boxed up in these thoughts. You must free your mind." So for him, it was a teaching. Uh, and then several other stories like that are really wild stories of the tantric yogi will do something wild, and then the villager will question him, and you say, "Aha, you know, you're not, your mind is not free. Your mind is really closed." And the purpose is like to get you to this almost Zen moment of like, "Huh, you're right, I'm too closed-minded." Um, there's a lot of stories like that as well in the Zen tradition. For example, you know, the monks in the Zen tradition, they are very respectful of women, no, and they're celibate. And then there's a story, there's a river. There was two monks, an old monk and his student, so the young one. And there was a river, they had to pass the river. Then there was this woman who wants to cross, but she was going to get wet. So the old monk, he put the woman on her shoulders. He carried her and crossed the river and then put her down, right? And you're not supposed to touch women. And then he kept walking, and the young monk kept walking. And then after a few hours, the young monk finally said, "Why did you do that? You weren't supposed to do that. You touched a woman, blah, blah, blah." And the old monk said, "I'm not carrying her anymore, but you still are. You see, I'm not carrying her anymore. You're still carrying her because you still." So that's similar to these tantric stories. And other wild stories like this one saint, and he's a saint, I think in Nepal somewhere. And and I read the book, and it was funny, and at the same time, it was very interesting. So he enlightens people by having sex with them, and he writes about his magical penis, and he writes poetry and and this is a revered saint, you know. And then the women are like, oh yes, please bless me and I'm liberated, etc. And you can see how, okay, is that real, or is he just abusing his power so he can get as many young women as he can, you know, under the guise of, I will enlighten you. So whether or not, we don't know, we're not here to judge, but you can see, my point is, you can see how somebody can use Tantra or actually any yoga, you know, and say, but we're doing this for enlightenment. So it can be abused in that way. So what happened was, actually, your mind is still 10 BCE, way back when, there was already a group of yogis who said, look, we don't want to practice yoga like that. You know, we don't want all of these rituals and confusion, etc. So we're going to do the practice very straightforward. Nobody can make, you know, mistakes like this or abuse. Just very straightforward. Okay, we're going to clean the body, because, you know, that's straightforward. What do I have all the time with me? It's my body, right? So I'm going to clean my body physically, and then, you know, do my postures, you know, physical postures. And what happens is, if I clean my body physically, I do my exercises, my physical exercises, what will happen? All of the channels will flow, will start to flow naturally. And if my channels, energy channels, start to flow naturally and they become pure, what will happen? Then I can meditate easily. So that became the path of the Hatha Yogi. So from like around the 10th to the 11th CE, you have the rise of the Hatha Yogis. So they took from like Patanjali's, remember the 8 limbs of yoga, the Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, etc. Right? They took out the yamas and niyamas, and they took from Tantra, they took out the rituals and the confusing bits, or what could be construed as confusing. And they said, okay, straightforward, Shat Karma, the cleansing techniques. You remember the cleansing techniques? The Pastrika, the Jataka, colon cleansing, etc. Yes. So that became the replacement. So it had a purpose. It wasn't just, I will do this nowly so I will have good digestion. It was also, if my body is pure and without disease, these channels can flow. And if the channels can flow, then I can reach the meditative state. There's one beautiful line in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, just like the manual for Hatha Yoga. And it says there's no Raja Yoga without Hatha Yoga, no Hatha Yoga without Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga is meditation, right? So there is no physical yoga without meditation. There's no meditation without physical yoga. So that's from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Hatha Yoga is not purely physical either. The ones who kept this tradition alive up to now, you know, are the Nath yogis. From the 11th to the 15th CE, that's the rise of the Nath yogis. So the Nath is like their nom. So they'll have a prenomen Nath, like Goraknath, Matsyendra Nath. There are people in Rishikesh in India, which is the sort of the seat of these Nath yogis, where they can still trace their lineage back to, you know, Shiva, from Shiva to Matsyendranath to Gorakshanath, etc., etc. My teacher can do that. Okay. So very different goals for the ancient yogi. Since we're talking about history of yoga, I'd also like to point out we can't really avoid talking about, where does Hinduism fall in? Where does Buddhism fall in? Seems like yoga teachers are always talking about yoga philosophy, and then the next second they're talking about Hinduism, or they're talking about Buddhism. You know, what is that? How's that all related? For a while, it's sort of like a free exchange of ideas, and it's not really clear cut, like this is this, and this is this and this is that. In fact, the word Hinduism, it's not like there's one Hinduism. There's many schools of Hinduism. Hinduism was just a word that the British gave to any religion coming from India. They said Hinduism, whatever that is, we don't care. It's Hinduism. Okay, but there's like many schools. Um, Buddha is Indian. Buddha is Indian, and you might think, how come there's like more Hindus than Buddhists in India? Because at one point they were wiped out by the Muslim tradition. But Buddhism spread also to Tibet in the north, and then to other Asian countries like Japan, where you have Zen, Southeast Asia, where you have the Burma, you have the monk tradition. Did they have it in Laos? Monks, yeah, Buddhists. They don't have it in the Philippines because the Spanish came and made us all Catholic. We're the only Catholic country in Asia. It's very funny. Okay, now remember the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, like this manual of Hatha Yoga. It's written by Swami Svatmarama. And I want to read to you this one chapter, chapter 4, verse 5. And it says, the world is only a fabrication of thought. Play of mind is only created by thought. By transcending the mind, which is composed of constructed thought, definitely peace will be attained. And I was so happy and happily surprised when I read this in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, because I studied Buddhism for 8 years. And one of the schools of Buddhism, the mind-only school, that entire school of Buddhism, its principles is this. The entire world is a fabrication of your mind, and it's in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And so they have the same thinking. Okay. So let's look a little further. When did yoga first appear in all these ancient texts? Just because it first appeared in those ancient texts doesn't mean, okay, that's the beginning of yoga. Because yoga practice predates written history. So before it was passed on from word of mouth and from guru to student, right? Before even written, anything was written down. And plus all the stuff that could have been written down, maybe we have probably lost them as well. Okay. So you have these 4 Vedas, these 4 books. It's like an encyclopedia of knowledge. And in one of those books called the Rig Veda, so you're talking about 4,000 years ago, dates are approximate. There's one line there that translates to something like this. Seers of the vast illumined seer, they yogically control their mind and their intelligence. It's also hard in English, so let's make it simpler. The wise people, the seers, they're wise people because they can see with their intuition way forward. Of Brahman, of the vast illumined seer, of the great one. What do they do? So they're saying, these wise people, what do? They yogically control their mind and intelligence. So they work with their intelligence and their mind by controlling it in a yogic way. And that's it. It doesn't further explain, well, what is yogic way? What does it mean to yogically control your mind and intelligence? So, but you have a clue. So you have a clue, but it doesn't tell you anything really more than that. Um, After the Vedas, you have the Upanishads. The Upanishads we date them around 800 to 500 BCE. And the Upanishads were writings of these sages. So all these sages are trying to get back to oneness, go back to divinity, find God, right? And they write about their experiences, their enlightened experiences. So they write them down in something called the Upanishads. Let's look at some Upanishads. By the way, of all the Upanishads written, 108 were preserved. That's why 108 is this very special number in yoga and in Hinduism, like in the mala beads, the prayer beads, you have 108 beads, 108 Upanishads. Okay. Sometimes you hear about have you heard of the 108 sun salutation challenge? Yeah, don't do it. Okay, Katha Upanishad says, this firm holding back of the senses is what is known as yoga. Then one should become watchful, for yoga comes and goes. Okay, this is very beautiful. Now we're getting somewhere. This firm holding back of the senses. So that's a practice, right? Does it remind you of one of the branches of yoga according to Patanjali? One of the things starts with a P. Pratyahara. Pratyahara is anteriorization, the holding back of the senses. So that's it. According to this Upanishad, that's yoga. That's the yoga. You hold back the senses. And then what happens? Well, sometimes you can do it, and then sometimes you can't. So it's a practice. Once you get it, you can easily slip out. So you need to keep practicing it. It's like that, if you're walking along the Grand Plage, Côte de Basque, and something appears in your mind, very beautiful. Aha! You have an aha moment, and then it's gone after a few seconds. So you have to keep reminding yourself. Writing on a journal is very useful. Just writing on the journal. Let's look at another Upanishad. This is the Shrestashvatara Upanishad. Let yoga be practiced within a cave, protected from the high wind, or in a place which is level, pure, and free from pebbles, gravel, fire, undisturbed by noise of water or market booths, which is delightful to the mind and not offensive to the eye. So it has a little bit more detail. It's telling us where to go, where to practice, kind of environment. When yoga is practiced, the forms which appear first and which gradually manifest Brahman, so it's like visions that appear, are those of snowflakes, smoke, sun, wind, fire, fireflies, lightning, crystal, and the moon. Did you like the crystal meditation last night? Do you remember? Maybe we can do it with the moon or fireflies. When earth, water, fire, air, and akash, which is space, arise, that is to say, when the 5 attributes of the elements mentioned in the books on yoga become manifest, then the yogi's body becomes purified by the fire of yoga, and he is free from illness, old age, and death. Voila, goes back to illness, old age, and death. So it's transcending that. The precursors of perfection in yoga, they say, are lightness and healthiness of the body, absence of desire. Why absence of desire? Because when you desire, it creates karma. And karma it will just become fulfilled. So any type of wanting that you have, it will just perpetuate your life. You just keep living on earth until you fulfill all of your wishes and all of your desires. If you've read the autobiography of a yogi, autobiography of a yogi, there's one chapter there where um, it's called Crystal Palace in the Sky, and then the guru manifests this crystal palace and for the student, and the student is like, oh, why are you doing this? And he said, well, at some point you desired this, so I'm finishing all of your karma, so I'm gonna make this manifest so that after that it's finished. Otherwise, he'll have to go and live life and life until he gets the crystal palace. So his guru was finishing all of his karma by manifesting it. The perfection, blah blah. Where are we? Light is healthiness of the body, absence of desire, clear complexion, pleasantness of voice, sweet odor, and slight excretions. As gold covered by earth shines bright after it has been purified, so also the yogi, realizing the truth of Atman. Atman is the soul, like the self. So realizing the truth of you becomes one with the non-dual Atman. So you no longer see yourself as separate. This is me, this is everything else. You see a oneness. So you attain the oneness, becomes one with the goal, and is free from grief. This one is from the Maitrayaniya Upanishad. In the beginning, Brahman was all this. So like the yin and the yang, remember the wholeness. Om Purnamada, Purnamidam, this is whole, that is whole. He was one and infinite, infinite in the east, infinite in the south, infinite in the west, infinite in the north, above and below and everywhere infinite. East and other regions do not exist for him, or across or above or below. The highest self is not to be fixed. He is unlimited, unborn, not to be reasoned about, not to be conceived. He is like the ether, which is everywhere. And at the destruction of the universe, he alone is awake. Thus, from that ether, he wakes all this world, which consists of thought only, and by him alone is all this meditated on, and in him it is dissolved. His is that luminous form which shines in the sun, and the manifold light in the smokeless fire, and the heat which in the stomach digests the food. Thus it is said, he who is in the fire, he who is in the heart, he who is in the sun, they are one and the same. He who knows this becomes one with the one. It's very beautiful if you meditate on it. It sort of reminds me, I don't know about you, but it sort of reminds me of some parts of the Old Testament, the Bible, and there's a theory in yoga philosophy that goes like this, that at one point in humanity, we had a golden age. In India, just in English, you have eons, decades, etc. You have in Indian philosophy, you have a yuga, Y-U-G-A, like a yoga with a U. Yuga. A yuga is like I don't know exactly how many years, but it's a great long time period. So there was that golden age, golden yuga. And during that time, everybody was just naturally spiritual. Everybody was one with Brahman. People were probably telepathic, and they probably practiced yoga, but didn't call it yoga because it was just so ingrained in everything. There was less disease. Everyone was living in harmony and living very, very long lives. If you look in the Bible and you try to look at the ages of those people, like Abraham, Isaac, they're all like 100 years old. Moses. So in the theory is that during this golden age, it wasn't like yoga was practiced only in India. Yoga was everywhere. It wasn't called yoga, but that type of practice was just everywhere. And that's why some people relate yoga to like shamanism and all of these very ancient civilizations and traditions. They're finding a link there. Okay. So the golden age of the golden age, like everybody, just like everybody has a, a mobile phone now, and it's very easy to reach somebody even if you don't meet them face to face, right? During that time, it wasn't technology that was the main thing. It was spirituality. Now we live in a Kali Yuga. It's the age of destruction. So there's war, there's less people understanding spirituality, etc., etc. Some people say that we're ending the Kali Yuga and we're beginning another golden age. Okay, so let's continue the Maitreya Upanishad. This is the rule for achieving it. Achieving what? Concentration of the mind on the object of meditation. So what do you need to do? Restrain the breath, restraint of breath, restraint of senses, meditation, fixed attention, investigation, absorption. These are called the six-fold yoga, the six-limbed yoga. So before Patanjali's 8 limbs, Ashtanga, there was the 6 limbs. And it's the same thing. Restraint of breath, pranayama. Restraint of senses, pratyahara. Meditation, dhyana. Fixed attention, dharana. Investigation would be like maybe part of the yamas, like spadhyaya. Absorption, samadhi. So it's a precursor to the 8 of Patanjali. When beholding by this yoga, he beholds the gold-colored maker, the Lord, the person, Brahman, the cause, then the sage, leaving behind good and evil. Why do you leave behind good and evil? Because when there's oneness and no duality, there is no good and evil. It's one. There's no duality. Leaving behind good and evil makes everything, breath, organs of sense, etc., to be one in the highest, indestructible, in the Pratyagatman or Brahman. Let's go back to the timeline. Okay, so you've got there the beautiful Upanishads. From the Vedas and the Upanishads, you get yoga philosophy. But also from the Vedas and the Upanishads, you get different forms of Hinduism. So that's the link between Hinduism and yoga philosophy is they have the same sources, like they're taking from the same, they're two rivers coming from the same source. Although some people will argue that it's yoga philosophy is coming out of Hinduism. So you can debate that. The Bhagavad Gita, around 400 to 200 BCE, is also a great work on yoga. And it's not yoga postures here. It's really about life, way of life. And you remember the forms of yoga that we studied in the first week? Remember, there's Bhakti Yoga, there's Jnana Yoga, etc. So each chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is called a yoga. There's a chapter on Karma Yoga. It's teaching you about how to do Karma Yoga. There's a chapter in Jnana Yoga. It's teaching you about wisdom. There's a chapter on Bhakti Yoga. It's teaching you about devotion. So the Bhagavad Gita is a teaching on yoga and how to live life. the Bhagavad Gita comes from a bigger book or a bigger epic legend. Like my son was reading the Odyssey. It's like the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's this great big story. This is a great big story of humanity. In India, they would memorize the Mahabharata. So that's this big legend is called the Mahabharata. And one chapter of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, or one story in that big legend is the Bhagavad Gita. So that's why when you read the Bhagavad Gita, it starts from the middle. It starts from there's a war, and in the middle of the war is Arjuna. And Arjuna is torn between the two sides because he comes to the realization that while he is the general of his side, the other side is actually his relatives, because he didn't grow up with them, or some stories, something like that. And then now he has to fight them, so he's torn. And it's supposed to be a metaphor between your material life and your spiritual life. You have to battle for your spiritual life, etc. But anyway, what he does is he goes to Krishna and he asks for, well, he goes to Krishna to ask for help. But the general from the other camp does the same thing and goes to Krishna for help. And the other guy gets to Krishna first. So he gets to Krishna first. And Krishna says, well, I say yes to everybody that comes to me. You came first, so you tell me what you want. Do you want my army or do you want my advice? And the other guy said, I want your army. And Arjuna, who is the main character in the Bhagavad Gita, he said, oh, it's okay, I want your advice. And then the whole book is about Krishna's advice to Arjuna on Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, on his life. So you are Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. All of this from the Vedas up to 200 BCE, some would say is the pre-classical period of yoga. And when you get to 200 BCE, about 3,000 years ago, where you have now the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the famous Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, becomes the classical period of yoga. Patanjali defines yoga as this, chapter 1, verse 2, yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. Okay? Or if you're from the north, you don't pronounce the last letter, so it's yog, chit, vritti, nirodha. Nirodha means, chitta means the mind, and it's one of the words that means the mind. Vritti, like parivritti trikonasan, parivritta janushasana. Yes, you know this now. It's like turning, twisting, turning, moving. Nirodha means let it, stopping, finished, stop. So yoga is stopping the turning of the mind. Okay, so stopping, you stay between the thoughts, you stop the thoughts. That's Patanjali. Patanjali's yoga is really a Raja yoga. Even when he said, these are the 8 branches of yoga, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama. When he said asana, in that context, he didn't mean postures. And you will not find in this classical text of the Yoga Sutra, nor in the Bhagavad Gita, you will not find a single yoga posture like this is how to do warrior one, this is how to do viparita karani. That came later. Asana, the Sanskrit word asana, comes to French as assis, asseyez-vous, and comes to the English as your ass, meaning it's your fessier, your buttocks, and it's what you sit on. So asana, before it meant posture, it actually meant how you sit down, or the actual place where you sit. So like the chair or the tapi. Back then it was like they sat on animal skin. Why? Oh, because it's warm. Right? And you put it on the ground. So that's what he meant by asana. And then he said that he only mentions the word asana twice. One, he says, these are the branches of yoga, blah, 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 asana. And then another sentence he says, Istir sukham asanam. Do your asana in comfort and ease, or something like stable and at ease. He didn't mean do your headstand or your warrior one at ease, or do your ashtanga practice with ease, and we hope we can do it at ease. He meant sit down at ease. That's very common. You'll see that phrase of Patanjali being described by yoga teachers and being put in the context of the dynamic yoga postures. Patanjali didn't talk about that. He talked about sitting down. Okay, we've done that. We've done that. That's to remind you, you know this already, right? The 8 limbs of the yoga. What Patanjali was saying. He didn't say just this. This is when you talk about Patanjali and you say, yeah, he said these things, the 8 limbs of yoga. That's not all he said. He said this in one a few lines. So your homework is actually, I was gonna say don't read the whole book, but you can if you want. It's not a very long book actually. It's like 160 sentences or something. Unless you read the commentaire, then it will become long. But if you read just what Patanjali wrote, he almost wrote an outline. Sutra is like an outline. Because why? Well, you're coming out of the golden age of yoga. Nobody needs to be taught. They just need an outline, and then yes, I know what you're talking about, Patanjali. But nowadays, Kali Yuga, it's like somebody has to explain to me what Patanjali is talking about. So then you have the commentaries. So your homework for tomorrow, please, tomorrow. No, let's not do it. Yeah, tomorrow afternoon, so you have a bit more time. Please find a verse, like one sentence from the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali that you like, and just explain to us, why you like it. How does it apply in your life? I really like when Patanjali says this, santosha, because, etc., etc. Yeah, it's a way to share Patanjali to the group. And you will do the same for the Bhagavad Gita. There's many different versions. Make sure you look at a real version and not a quotation on Facebook, because sometimes, you get quotations from Facebook or Instagram and it says from the Dalai Lama, but, the Dalai Lama never said that. Or it happened one time and she said, the student said, yes, this is Patanjali Yoga Sutra. And I said, are you sure? And then I said, maybe it's a commentary, She said, no, I saw it on Instagram. And okay, no, it's not from Patanjali, because it's easy to know if it's from Patanjali, because it's like I said, it's a short book. Okay, so Patanjali and Bhagavad Gita. Choose one line, or sometimes one line doesn't make sense. You need to have 2 lines. After Patanjali, came Hatha Yoga. So now we start to get more into some details about asanas, the different types of asanas. So from Gorakshanath, we have 32 books of yoga. He wrote a lot. Huh? So we're now going to the 10th to the 11th CE. There's something called the Sharad Tilaka Tantra, and it contains a lot about cosmology, mantra, yantras, nadis, kundalinis, chakras. If you're interested in like the evolution of Hatha Yoga and the roots of Hatha Yoga, I would really recommend the works of Dr. James Mallinson. And his perspective is really interesting because he comes from an academic perspective, not from like a yoga perspective. So he's really looking at facts, and it's very interesting. He also lived with he also went to India, I think, for many years, and he lived with some Nath yogis. And he's a doctor of Sanskrit as well. So he takes the Sanskrit text, the original, and translates it. Shiv Samhita, author unknown. So you've got some yoga postures there as well. It was written around the same time as the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is written by Swami Swatmarama. In this Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you will find lots of yoga postures. I say lots, I mean like maybe 12. Still not a lot. You know what happened? When the British came, that's when there was like this explosion of yoga poses, because then the yogis also took from wrestling and gymnastics and added those in the asanas. Okay. Now we'll take a look at some more like yogis from the now, from the modern age.